If I asked you what the biggest ship disaster was, you would most likely, 99% sure, say the Titanic. And that would be correct. But do you know what answer you would get if the same question were asked in South Korea? The Sewol ferry disaster. This tragedy shook the people of South Korea so much that they even held protests demanding the resignation of their president. When you hear this story, you realize just how devastating corruption can be, and how even the South Korean government neglected its own citizens. So, switch on your cosmic mode in your mind, because in the universe no one can stop you from watching this video. April 16, 2014. Just another ordinary morning. From Incheon Port, heading to Jeju Island, the Sewol ferry was filled with passengers. There were a total of 476 people on board, 325 of them were students from Danwon High School in Ansan. They were on a long-awaited school trip. If you've ever gone on a trip with classmates, you can probably imagine how they felt, full of excitement, laughter, and anticipation for adventures ahead. No one knew that for most of them, this would be the last trip of their lives. The Sewol ferry was originally built in Japan in 1994 and brought to Korea in 2012, where it was modified to carry more passengers. But those modifications made the ship unstable. The previous captain even complained about this and demanded repairs. But his requests were ignored. Now, back to the incident. The night on the ship passed quietly. But around 9 a.m., a sudden sharp turn caused the ferry to start shaking. People braced themselves against the walls as the ship tilted dangerously. Students' panicked voices could be heard, "What's happening?" At first, no one realized how serious the situation was. Some passengers waited for announcements from the crew, but instead of reassurance, what they heard marked the beginning of the tragedy. "Everyone, stay where you are. Do not move. It's safer for you that way." Here's an important detail. The first person to call the Coast Guard wasn't a crew member, it was a student, frightened by how badly the ship was shaking. Only afterward did the crew members make their calls. By then, the ferry was tilting fast, and water was already flooding the lower decks. What should the crew have done? Of course, they should have started evacuating people immediately. But instead, they just kept repeating, "Stay where you are, don't move." This was 2014, every student had a phone. Many called their parents. Their parents told them, "Listen to the crew, they're experienced, they know what they're doing." And the students promised they would obey. As the ship continued sinking, rescue operations were delayed. The responders weren't properly trained, and some officials didn't take the disaster seriously enough. The government's rescue operation was slow and ineffective. By the time rescue ships arrived, it was already too late. Here's the shocking part. Of the 172 people who survived, more than half were saved not by the official rescuers, but by fishing boats and commercial vessels in the area. Only 2 helicopters were used, for 476 people, that was nowhere near enough. One survivor, a girl named Yujia Young, later wrote, "As I was being lifted up by the helicopter, I looked down. I thought about how my friends would see me from below. Would they look at me with hate in their eyes, thinking I abandoned them?" Meanwhile, on television, officials were announcing, "Everyone has been rescued. Everything is under control." But in reality, very few had been saved. Parents watched live broadcasts, seeing the desperate situation their children were actually in. And the captain? Instead of taking charge, he tried to cover up the disaster with lies. While the passengers were trapped inside, he and some crew members abandoned ship. Do you know who this man was? Yes, the very same infamous captain we've all heard about. He stripped off his uniform, disguised himself in regular clothes, and was one of the first to escape. When the captain abandoned the ship, I was still on the phone with my daughter. By that time, he had already been rescued. I told her to listen to the crew. That was my biggest mistake. I should have told her to escape quickly. But I didn't know the full situation. All I said was, "Follow the adults' instructions." She promised me she would, and she kept her promise. After that call, I could never reach her again. Within 2 hours, the Sewol was completely underwater. By then, all the students had drowned. Before the ferry sank, the students fought hard to survive. They tried to comfort each other, but the videos recorded on their phones revealed the fear and terror in their voices. They sent farewell messages to their parents. "Mom, I need to tell you this now because I might not get another chance. I love you so much. Dad, I don't think I'm going to make it. The hallways are too crowded with kids, I can't get through." One student, a girl named Park Ji-young, texted her parents. "Mom, I'm sorry. I love you." Another, Kim Sung-min, wrote, "No one is coming to save us. Have they forgotten about us?" These heartbreaking messages later shook South Korea to its core. They became some of the most painful pieces of evidence in history. Honestly, even while preparing this story, reading these words gave me chills. I can only imagine how unbearable it must have been for Korean parents. Personally, I can't even imagine it. Thousands of people demanded justice for this crime. When it was revealed that the captain and crew had abandoned ship, mass protests erupted across South Korea. The first question people asked was, why was the government so late? Parents were shouting, "Why didn't you save our children? Why was the death toll so high?" 304 lives lost. Especially considering the ferry sank not far from the shore, in a fishing and shipping area where there were plenty of boats nearby. The weather was calm, and the currents weren't strong. Nothing should have prevented a rescue operation. So why weren't they saved? When the first distress signals were sent, South Korea's rescue services didn't take the situation seriously. They couldn't imagine the ship would actually sink. In the crucial first hours, government officials misjudged the situation. The media spread false news that everyone has been rescued. While parents and the public knew from phone calls that their children were still trapped inside, the TV kept reporting lies. Rescue ships arrived late. Helicopters never approached the ferry. Even when divers finally got there, almost no one was left alive. But perhaps the most horrifying part, more than 30 crew members had been on board, watching the disaster unfold, yet they did nothing. When the rescue operation ended, only 172 people had survived. After that, the grim task began, recovering the dead. Parents waiting on the shore fainted one after another as they saw their children's bodies being carried out. Some parents never even received their children's remains. They begged, "Please, even if my child is dead, let me have their body so I can remember them." One grieving parent said, "At first, we prayed to see our child alive. Then, even their dead body would have been enough. We even envied the parents who at least had their children's remains, because we didn't get even that." The authorities' job was to recover the bodies as well. But they lied, saying they had checked all the cabins and found no one inside. Yet in March 2017, when the Sewol was finally raised from the sea, the remains of those missing students were discovered inside. So what punishment did the captain and crew face? While the students drowned, Captain Lee Jun-suk and his assistants had already made it safely to land. Photos later surfaced showing the captain disguised in civilian clothes, begging rescuers, "Save me first." This tragedy became one of the most shameful moments in South Korea's history. Now, let's talk about the investigations. How exactly did the Sewol sink? The main cause was severe overloading. The ferry was designed to carry 987 tons of cargo. But that day, it was carrying 3,608 tons. Even so, it kept sailing. Then, the crew made a fatal mistake. They executed a sharp turn. All the overloaded cargo shifted to one side, tipping the ferry. Once it started leaning, there was no way to bring it back. The captain and crew delayed evacuation and gave passengers the wrong instructions, which sealed their fate. In addition, the rescue system failed. Many of the lifeboats weren't even seaworthy. Corruption in the government also played a role. The shipowners had bribed inspectors to overlook safety checks. That's how they got permission to load 3 to 4 times more cargo than the ferry was supposed to carry. When these facts came to light, nationwide outrage grew even stronger. Protests intensified. People demanded truth and justice. To this day, the Sewol ferry disaster is remembered as one of the greatest tragedies in South Korea's history. The victims' families are still demanding accountability. The Sewol tragedy shook all of South Korea to its core. After the disaster, the country was never the same. It wasn't just about the 304 lives lost, it was proof of how the government lied to its own people. There wasn't a single Korean who hadn't heard about the tragedy. For years, it fueled a nationwide struggle for justice. Public trust in the government collapsed completely. At the time, President Park Geun-hye didn't even take responsibility for her administration's delayed and failed rescue system. Even after the tragedy, the government tried to quietly cover it up. Some media outlets downplayed the disaster, and officials spread false information. But the people refused to stay silent. Thousands demanded justice, shouting, "We want the truth." Crowds gathered in Seoul's central squares. Protests and the fall of the president. In 2016, millions of South Koreans took to the streets, demanding Park Geun-hye's resignation. These protests weren't only about the Sewol tragedy, but it was the event that shattered people's trust in the government for good. Court trials related to the Sewol ferry. Captain Lee Jin-suk was sentenced to life in prison. 14 crew members received sentences ranging from 5 to 30 years. The shipowner and company executives were convicted of financial crimes. In total, 339 people connected to the case were arrested, and 154 of them were sentenced. South Korea's president at the time, Park Geun-hye, was heavily criticized. The scandal contributed to her eventual arrest and 25-year prison sentence. She has since been pardoned. But for thousands of grieving families, these punishments weren't enough. After all, they had lost two things: their children, and their hope for the future. Even today, every year on April 16, memorials are held across South Korea for the victims of the Sewol ferry disaster. Streets in Seoul and other major cities are decorated with yellow ribbons, the symbol of the children who died. Share your thoughts about this story in the comments. For now, goodbye.